What is good, NIO family? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And this one wants to break down what's going on with NIO stock, what's going on with the overall market, and talk about some very important levels to watch for. I'm also going to break down some very important things going on for this week and the next couple of trading days, as we have Apple's big event and some big data dropping a little bit later. But before I break anything down about all of this information, before I get into any more details, let me just mention a couple of things. I'm firstly not a financial planner, so take none of this as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link, which is down below in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you are guaranteed up to 12 free stocks. The offer ends in just about 4 days, so check it out before they run out. Anyways, let's break down what's going on with NIO and all these different charts. So when it comes to NIO has been on this downtrend, right? Continuing to drop and drop and drop. However, on the 4-hour MACD, we're starting to curl just a little bit, and you can see that NIO is not crashing as hard. It's trying to base around this area and it's trying to form a slight divergence. So I'm really hoping that as long as there's no bad news, because if we get a bad piece of news, yes, NIO could start tanking and make its way back to 8.8. However, here's the thing. Before that happens, if that is going to happen anyways, there's a good chance that it's going to try to fill this gap first. We have a gap that's unfilled around this 10.58 area. I think that there's a good chance that NIO is going to try to bounce and fill that gap before it ends up dropping all the way down to lower levels. So I think this gap is going to get filled soon, and I'm hoping that we fill this gap around. It's actually like very close to 10.6, very close to that area. It doesn't have to be exact, but wherever it goes with the doji forming on the daily chart, there's a chance we might see a bounce from here just to fill this gap, and then it could continue lower after that, as the trend on the daily is still more bearish. But the thing about NIO to remember is that, like I told you guys earlier, NIO tends to be very strong during the month of September for deliveries, and also during November and December. We tend to be very strong. October tends to be a little bit weaker on the delivery side historically, but we have some strong months coming, and I do believe in NIO's future. Now, when it comes to the overall news, I haven't seen too much news involving China, but NIO did nothing wrong. I want to make this clear. What did NIO do wrong to really cause it to tank like this? Yes, their earnings weren't the best, but that was a while back, and we actually saw NIO bounce after its deliveries report. NIO dropped for the last couple of days, not because it's a bad company, but because all of the other Chinese tickers have been sinking amidst the bad Chinese economic data and some bad news involving China and other tensions. Okay, so it's not NIO's fault entirely. We should not just attack NIO. It's not their fault that they're getting stuck in these geopolitical issues, not to mention other macroeconomic factors. But anyways, I want to now talk about what's going on for the week. As a reminder, we have no significant data for Monday or Tuesday, just like consumer inflationary expectations on Monday at 11 o'clock a.m. Nothing else too big from there on until Wednesday, when we have CPI coming out. CPI is going to be massive. We are expecting an increase in CPI, so be prepared for that. And that's going to affect how the whole market moves. However, here's the thing about CPI and etc. When it comes to all of this data, CPI is going to be something coming out for the middle of the week. Before that, we have the Aapl event on September 12th. And approaching this event, we might see Aapl pump a little bit, as Aapl has an unfilled gap above, and this could help the market bounce as a result. NIO has been dropping on low volume. It's not crashing on high volume. It's a very low volume drop, which is a decent sign. And on top of that, if you look at the overall price versus its short volume, it's still not looking like that bad in my opinion. Now, we're getting some buy ratings from like Deutsche Bank and etc. So that's a good piece of news that came out. The price price ratio is relatively flat, as NIO starting to flatten compared to the market. And Mondays tend to be green only about like 49% of the time. So it's very much just a coin flip. So that doesn't really matter too much. But there's not a whole lot of shorting going on with NIO. We're not seeing an aggressive amount of shorts coming in, suppressing the company. It's very much just neutral. So what do I think is going to happen to the market? Well, here's the thing. I think Aapl has a very, very nice looking structure. If you look at the daily chart, it's looking a little weak, but we have this unfilled gap, and we might see Aapl attempt to fill this gap before possibly going lower. But there's a good chance it's going to try to fill this gap all the way up into like the very low 180s. And if that's the case, that could actually help the market bounce, because here's the thing. When you zoom into the chart, we have an inverse head and shoulders structure on Aapl. Aapl has been showing some strength, making higher highs and higher lows for the past 2 days. And even though this thing continued to sink, we have the unfilled gaps above, which I believe Aapl is going to make an attempt to fill going into tomorrow. So I'm leaning more in that direction. I think Aapl filling the gap is going to help SPY pump a little bit. We have an inverse head and shoulders on SPY, so this thing may go to this imbalance around this 448 area. For Nvda, it may help this thing bounce off the historical support around this 450 zone. So Nvidia could bounce too, and this could help the market, especially the Nasdaq. We have this unfilled gap at 470. So we're going to be watching this thing try to break 465 to break to 470. And then finally, for like Tesla may make an attempt to bounce too, try to get back to this like mid 250 area before rejecting and just trading sideways. I think there's a good chance it's going to do that, but Tesla's been very sideways for the last couple of trading days, not really doing anything that crazy. So with that said about Tesla, SPY, and Apple and all these tickers potentially bouncing, the QQQ may also get a bounce before I talk about NIO. The QQQ also has an inverse head and shoulders structure that is developed on it, a nice accumulation, and we might see this thing try to push up towards this imbalance at 377. But we first have to break above 375. So it looks like we may get a pump approaching Apple's event, but don't forget, Apple has these big events all the time. Okay, by all the time, I mean like every few months, but you understand my point. When this happens historically, Apple tends to pump approaching the events, then after the events, we tend to see Apple sink down. Apple tends to drop after the big events. So with that said, there's a high probability Apple may pump approaching its event, try to fill its gaps around like the 180s, very, very low 180s, and then maybe dump after the event. If that's the case, it's going to have a big effect on the market. All right, so what does this all mean for NIO? What does Apple have to do with NIO? Well, the way that the market moves could affect NIO. We have a bullish divergence developing on the 30 minutes time frame. But here's the thing, okay? These divergences and all these technicals, they do matter. They can be significant, but not always. If we get a really bad piece of news, that could trump them. And that's the only issue with NIO. We keep getting all this bad news involving China. That's why it started to sell off. It wasn't really NIO's fault. So as long as there's no bad news, if there's bad news that comes out tomorrow, again, we could see NIO sink down to 9.49. However, here's the thing. I can predict the news, and I'm not leaning in the direction of that happening as we've dropped like almost 4 days in a row. So my guts tells me, as long as there's no bad news, I think we're going to get a bounce, and we're going to see NIO make an attempt to fill this gap around this 10.58 zone, very close to 10.6. And then we may reject off that and start to cool off a little bit. But I think there's going to be a bounce coming to NIO. It's due for a bounce. It's been a very, very long time. So watch for it to try to gap up and push up to about 10.58 or so, then reject off that and trade sideways. I think Apple may help the whole market pump, and I think this could help NIO at the same time. But please remember my videos from earlier. Even if NIO is a little slow for the time being, we have a very bright future. The end of the year is going to be strong for the markets and also for NIO, in my opinion. I think as long as there's not way too much bad news from a macroeconomic standpoint on a daily basis, I think there's a lot of potential in this stock, and I think the long term is still very, very bright despite these short-term fluctuations. So hopefully this video was helpful. I thank you all so much for listening. For my Americans out there, please enjoy football, which is starting now for the postseason matches. I hope you guys have fun if you are watching that. If not, enjoy your Sunday, enjoy what life has to offer, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you, and peace out.